You are listening to Artistic Finance, show 174. On today's show, we talk with lighting designer Don Holder. We get his advice for young designers. We hear about managing finances as a freelancer and the advantages of filing taxes as a C Corp. Since we recorded this interview, there's been one change in Don's life, and that is the recent announcement that he is going to be leaving Rutgers University at the end of this academic year to take over as the head of lighting design at Yale. Congratulations to Don and to all the Yale students who are getting one of the world's best lighting designers as their teacher. When I was editing this interview, I did catch a mistake. When I introduce Don, I say that 115 people have seen his design of The Lion King. What I meant to say was 115 million people have seen that show since it opened 27 years ago. Don mentions a lot of designers and people that he has worked with. I have put links to all of those people or things in the show notes, which you can find at artisticfinance.com/174. Without further ado, let's get to the show.
You are listening to Artistic Finance, where we help creatives learn about the business of show business.
Welcome and thank you for listening. I'm your host, Ethan Steimel. Today I'm joined by lighting designer Don Holder. We're recording this August 22nd, 2024. The current news is that Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, a different Don than the one we're talking to, are campaigning to be the next president of the USA. And by the time you listen to this, you'll already know the outcome of that. But let's get to our Don Holder. If you're listening to this, you have seen Don's work, period. More than 115 people have experienced Don's lighting design of Disney's The Lion King, which has been on Broadway since 1997. His work on that show earned him his first Tony Award. In addition, Don has lit several Broadway shows that have run for 2 or more years, including Movin' Out, the 2008 revival of South Pacific, for which he won another Tony Award, Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark, known for having the largest budget in Broadway history and being quite a spectacle, and Anastasia, a show that I thought was beautiful. And Don, I must say there was a light cue or sequence where there was like a bunch of people died, right? And there was a flash of red and then it went like blue into winter and cold. And that is like one of those theatrical moments that's burned into my brain as gorgeous.
I know exactly what moment you're talking about, and thank you.
Don has also lit more than 100 off-Broadway shows, several shows at the Met Opera, and has provided theatrical lighting for TV shows such as Smash and The Marvelous Miss Maisel. And his architectural lighting projects include New York restaurants Bond 45, the Redeye Grill, and the Brooklyn Diner. And finally, Don was the head of lighting design at CalArts for 4 years and now leads the lighting department at Rutgers University. Okay, I'm exhausted by all that. Don, what else should we know about you?
I'm not responding in any means to get you more exhausted, but I'm also a volunteer firefighter and EMT in my community. I have been for about 15 years. Well, EMT very recently, since the pandemic, but firefighter, yeah, since 2009.
EMT being somebody that helps like heal people, like stop wounds and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's basic emergency care is what I sometimes volunteer to participate in. I mean, it's not advanced emergency care, basic, so. But it's very rewarding. I mean, being a person who offers a helping hand to people in my community has been quite gratifying, and certainly offers a different perspective than working in a dark theater.
Wow, no joke.
Well, which I enjoy immensely, don't get me wrong, but I mean, it's always good to expand your horizons and meet a different circle of people. And there's lots of benefits to be gained from that kind of endeavor, I think.
Wow, holy cow. I'm in shock from this. This is amazing because I'm always thinking people in theater don't have time to do anything else. But those are 2 time-consuming tasks that you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of recertification and training involved. You have to fulfill a certain minimum in terms of participating in calls, and you have to complete your training. But it's possible to do it even with a schedule that's a bit hectic, chaotic, and unpredictable. I found, it just takes a little bit of discipline. But I'm not saying I'm the top responder. There's no way I could be the top responder, but I'm also not afraid of going to calls at 2 o'clock in the morning because sometimes I'm just getting home then.
That's true. Wow. Okay, all right, Don, your creative personality here. What is a live event that you like to experience as an audience member or a piece of art that you like?
It's not a surprise that I love going to the theater. I mean, it's very, I learn a lot, but I'm also inspired by the work that other people do. But I really like, I mean, I love going to off Broadway and wherever I can find the time to see new things. But overseas, I found the most inspirational and kind of moving experiences. I remember seeing a Richard III in Berlin, Germany, at the Schaubühne, which was directed by, I think, Thomas Ostermeyer. It's just seeing theater across cultures is really fascinating. To you understand how theater making is kind of universal on a certain level, but also seen through a completely different lens, using different tools and a different sensibility, and that I think really challenges you as a creative person. So I think that's fun. I also love going to concerts. My daughter Sarah took me to Billy Joel at MSG, and that was kind of an amazing revelation or revelatory experience in different ways, but equally potent, I would say, as seeing some great show.
All right, your financial personality. Are you bad or good with money? Slash, what is your relationship with money?
Well, I mean, I'm like everybody else. You need money to live and to sustain oneself and keep a roof over your head. But I would say that I'm not particularly good with money. I mean, I've been lucky because I've met people who have helped me navigate those waters, and I've gotten some good advice, which has put me in decent stead. Let's put it that way. I mean, I'm not terrible, but maybe I am. I mean, I'm not. I'm sure there's a lot of mistakes I've made that things I could have done better.
Okay, all right. So I have a bunch of questions about the business and finance of things, but I've started a new thing where I ask people to submit questions. And so I'm going to start with a couple questions that came in, and then we'll get to those other ones. So this is from Sean Linehan, who's an electrician and a gaffer. And he says, how did your rise as an electrician into a designer influence design choices? And what advice can you recommend to upcoming LDs that may have never worked a load in as a technician?
I think that's a really good question. Yes, I'm very proud of my roots as a not only an electrician but as a TD. I feel like that gives you sort of a much more pragmatic perspective about what it takes to make the work. It certainly gives me an appreciation, a deeper appreciation about what our colleagues who are artisans and craftspeople who make our work possible. I think that the danger is it's tricky because if you have experience as an electrician, perhaps that can get in the way of perhaps that might mitigate some of your more creative impulses because you know how hard it is to do. But on the other hand, I think that you can, if you have an understanding not only of the tools that you're working with, but what it takes to actually mount the work, you make better decisions and you make decisions that will basically maximize the time and resources you have available to you. So I credit my experience as a technician first in giving me a real great foundation to approaching the technical aspects of our work. And that's getting more and more complicated, as you know, on a monthly basis. So it's not scary to me. It's something that I'm always curious about and always trying to improve my skills and my knowledge about what's going on the technical end of things. It just makes you a better designer the more you know. And I think the other question was, what would I advise young designers to take on in terms of being an electrician? I think I would recommend that you spend some time in your early years being an electrician and hanging shows. I think it's really good training, and it gives you a great background and sensibility for making the work as a creative person. Understanding it's like a sculptor gets their hands dirty with the clay and all the rest. I mean, I think lighting designers should be the same thing. I think an exposure to electrics work and hanging shows is really important. You learn. I remember when I was in grad school, and we certainly do this with our students at Rutgers, is that we were required to focus the lighting, for example, for every one of our colleagues. And you learn a lot about what mistakes you shouldn't make and what works well just by focusing a light. And if you're a lighting designer communicating to an electrician, if you don't understand what they're dealing with, if they're lying on their belly, reaching way down on a balcony rail to get that bottom shutter, you have no idea what that really means unless you've been through it yourself. Part of learning the tools of the trade, which is so important in what you do as a lighting designer, is experiencing the rigor of actually putting that work together and putting it into a theater and focusing it, hanging it, and troubleshooting it. I mean, we could spend 2 hours talking about how to strike a balance between being an electrician and being a lighting assistant or lighting designer. That's a separate conversation, but I think you should find ways. The short response is find a way to be an electrician and engage fully in it, because I think it will help you ultimately.
I think that's great. And I never really thought, we're always about being patient with people. The electrician says it's going to take a while and you say, okay, yeah, no rush, no problem, fine. But if you understand why it's taking them a while or why it might take longer than you would think, that's helpful too. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like when you rig a lighting position, think about, well, how am I going to focus that position? It's not just what the light does and why the position is there. There are probably lots of good reasons, but okay, how is it going to be maintained? How is it going to be focused and hung? Those are really important questions, especially if you're working in a commercial environment.
All right. Next question is from Darius Evans, who I believe is an undergrad lighting student. What should someone do to prepare themselves to work on Broadway? And I'm assuming this is as a lighting designer.
Broadway is a great place to work, and I've been very, very fortunate to have worked there quite a bit. I think that you can't really target Broadway as your specific goal. I think you have to put yourself in a position where you can potentially get involved with a project that may move on to Broadway. But I think the important thing is to work and to make good connections with artistic collaborators, make artistic relationships, learn how to be the best designer and best collaborator and best communicator you can possibly be, and then seek out opportunities that could connect you with folks who will be moving up to working on Broadway. There's no clear path, as I'm sure you would attest, to really get to a specific place in our careers. It's the beauty and the frustration, I think, about what we do. Any day, your entire trajectory could change. But the important thing is to, I know it's an old adage, but, be in the right place at the right time. And what I mean by that is work with good people, not necessarily Broadway designers, but people who are doing really interesting and innovative work, and become the best designer you can be. And then you're putting yourself in a position to potentially work on Broadway. So to aspire to it is fine, but to sort of make a plan, to work a specific plan or a timeline when you need to be working on Broadway, I think is kind of unrealistic, and it might make you sad or frustrated or all of the above.
Okay. And then how did you get started in theater/lighting design?
Well, I'll try to be as brief as possible. I mean, I think my parents took me to shows when I was a kid. I grew up outside of New York City on Long Island, and my mother in particular was a lover of musicals and opera and ballet, and we got exposed to all of that at an early age. I was always interested in fire and light. I was always the Boy Scout building campfires. I started working with light when I was in middle school, I think, and it just became, grew into a passion that I eventually I went to grad school and got some formal training, but it was a circuitous path. My undergraduate degree is actually in forestry from the University of Maine. And I did do a lot of theater while I was there. Also, where I was quite a musician, a tuba player and a bass player. But so I did a lot of work in the theater, and I studied informally in lighting as an undergrad. But it wasn't until I went to grad school and then beyond that I actually became a lighting designer. But going back to my previous point, I always had an ambition to work on Broadway and design a Broadway musical. But there was a certain point in my career where I thought it was never going to happen, and then it did. I just got out of school and started working, and got the best training I possibly could get, and worked hard. And I was very fortunate. Certain things happened that led to other things. I mean, that's the way it works in our business. It's who you meet, who you work with. Part of it is luck, and part of it is preparing for the opportunities that come your way, having everything in place so that you could be successful with the shot that you're given. You don't want to, you want to take full advantage of the opportunities that you receive. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I think that's great.
That's a long question to answer.
Yeah. I'm just like the volunteer firemen and the EMT and the forestry are just all things that are amazing to me right now.
Well, the firefighting and all that, it came later in my career. I mean, I didn't have time to do anything but lighting for the first 20 years or so of my professional career. And then I felt like I felt the need, and I felt like I was ready to do other things. Let me make that clear. I wasn't doing all that when I was starting out, believe me. I was just doing lighting. I was living and breathing it 365, 24/7 or whatever.
Yeah. Actually, just a side question, which is when you did get your first Broadway show, how old were you and what was it?
It was in 1989. So I was 31, and it was Eastern Standard, a new play by Richard Greenberg at the Golden Theater. And I could tell you some stories about that. It was a rather auspicious, it was like a typical Broadway beginning, I guess. I of course thought that Broadway was going to be the Nirvana, and of course that show, the scenery didn't show up until after I was forced to focus the entire rig. There was you guys know about breaking the yellow card, but anyway, I had to basically focus the entire thing before any of the set showed up because it was delayed, and it was a multi-set non-unit situation where massive wagons rolling on and off. And it was a complicated show, and it came out fine. I mean, obviously it did destroy my career, but it was quite an introduction to the Broadway scene. I was very scared, and in fact, Jennifer Tipton, who was doing my teacher, who was lighting Jerome Robbins Broadway across the street, would come by and visit. And I think at one point she said I should take a Valium or some kind of sedative to calm down. I mean, it was that flipped out. I didn't do it. I probably should
have. That's amazing. All right. So now let's get on to your financial life. Going back before your career, growing up, did you have a good financial example?
No. Nothing against my parents, but I don't think that they were, I came from a very modest middle-class background. My mother was a teacher in the city of New York. My father worked in advertising and public relations, and we had a good, stable way of life, but it was not by any means, I'd come from a rich family with a lot of generational income. My parents got by, and that was not their mindset. It's not like we went broke and we were struggling for money, but my parents, they earned a salary. They managed to provide a good life from my brother and I. And, but in terms of getting financial advice from them or understanding what it means to organize a budget or devote a certain portion of your income to savings, etc., I think I learned that later. But again, I don't want to take my parents to task. They the best they could, and they were great.
Yeah. And just like theater lighting, it's a complicated topic. So even if you're the best in the world at it, like how do you relay that to somebody else?
I mean, but if you know, I guess they didn't have a lot of money, so they didn't have the opportunity to invest or do any of those things.
Yeah. So then at the start of your career, and it sounds like you went to undergrad, maybe took a while, then went to grad school. After grad school, what did your finances look like then?
Yeah, so I worked for 3 years after undergrad, and then my finances were pretty bad, meaning that they weren't pretty bad. I mean, I wasn't on the street, but I just remember first of all, I was never the life of a lighting designer, and I think it remains true today. There's a lot of uncertainty about what's next. How are you going to pay your bills kind of in the long term? Are you going to get hired for anything beyond a month or two from the current date? I mean, those were all real concerns for me. And I wasn't particularly good about setting aside funds to pay my income taxes in April of every year. And typically I got cleaned out because I was just really bad about. I didn't have the income to really set aside funds, nor did I have the financial discipline. So I was always kind of on the brink of financial ruin. It felt like, despite how much I was working, I didn't really make a lot of money. I was happy. I was doing what I wanted to do, but I just remember getting really quite despondent right around April 14th because A, I didn't have any jobs to look coming up, and B, I was getting my bank account cleaned out. And so I shouldn't be saying this, but I would do crazy things. Like one year I applied for a line splicing job at Con Edison, and my wife said at that time, she said, if you leave the theater to become a line splicer, I'm going to walk out. And I thought it would have been an interesting job. I guess it goes back to my electrician background. I never did that, but I'm just saying every year I took the LSAT one year in April. I started studying to be an air traffic controller. I mean, it was all because I just had no money. I just didn't save, and I just barely had enough to pay the rent, etc. So, but it got better. It got better.
Okay, awesome. All right. So now, do you think or worry about money on a daily basis?
No, fortunately, I don't. No, I finally, I think I've gotten to the place where I don't need to do that. I never really did. Like I said, it's not like it's been a big change. I think there was a certain point where I should have worried more than I did, and I've been working a long time, so I think I've been very fortunate. I mean, my career as a lighting designer has ultimately reaped great dividends, not only in terms of what I've experienced in my life and the people I've worked with and the kind of just being a creative person has been unbelievably rewarding, but financially I feel like I've been very fortunate as well.
Awesome. Do you have any debts like student loans, medical debt, mortgages?
No, everything is paid. I paid off my student loans. It took a while, maybe 10 or 15 years after grad school. But I'm pretty vigilant now about trying to pay off credit card debt up front. Mortgage is paid. So there's no car finance. So there's nothing really. Basically, you're operating with no debt. That doesn't mean there's not expenses, of course, but.
Of course. I think you answered this with no, but have you ever used a budget?
No. No. I mean, I thought about it. I've been involved with a financial advisor for a long time, and they have, in terms of long-term planning and trying to organize finances and retirement in the long term, they tried to figure out a budget for us. So ultimately there was, but I didn't. It wasn't initiated by me.
Yeah, amazing. And it sounds like it was just used to get a snapshot, not an ongoing thing.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, what is the best financial thing you've ever done or a really good thing you've done that others could maybe learn from or emulate?
I think one of the best things we did as soon as our children were born, we started putting money away in savings religiously for their college education. And ultimately, there was no 529 account available back when we started that, but ultimately there was, and that money really grew. And so by the time our kids went to college, and I feel like it put them in a really good place. They were free to make the decisions that were best for them. And so I feel like that was one of the best things we did. And I have so much empathy for kids going to college because obviously I teach kids who want to be lighting designers and want to come to Rutgers, and a lot of them are coming from families who just can't come up with the tuition. And on top of that, we're artists, and parents don't understand what a lighting designer does, and they're not quite sure the big investment in a college education is ultimately going to pay off. And so it's hard for some kids to, they struggle with finding the resources to follow their dream, which for me is always heartbreaking.
Yeah. All right. So your work, how did you get your first lighting design job?
I'm trying to think what it was. Well, my first lighting design job out of grad school. I think most of my jobs have always come from connections, people I've known and people I've worked with. And in the case of my first job, I think it was working for, there were two jobs. One was the lighting supervisor for Ballet Hispanico of New York. And that came as a result of a connection from a stage manager who I went to school with, who got me hired for that role. And then I also started my money-making job was working for Imero Fiorentino Associates, which was, I don't know if you know Imero Fiorentino. He was like the father of television lighting design, and he had a consulting firm that operated out of the Empire Hotel, which is now the Empire Hotel. And basically, he had a stable of all the leading television lighting designers of the day, like Bill Klages, who I'm sure you've heard of, and others of that ilk, Randy Nordstrom and Don Shirley, and they were lighting everything on basically everything that was live broadcast. They were lighting, and Imero Fiorentino had these guys working for him, and he was doing a lot of consulting on Epcot and a lot of hotel ballrooms and other facilities where his team was designing lighting infrastructure, dimming and control systems, the works, basically serving as a theater consultancy. So I got a job through some connections at Summerstock, working as a draftsperson at IFA. So in both cases, it was about people I met, sometimes casually, sometimes as a student or a co-student, and then ultimately one job leads to another. I mean, you make connections in the work that you do, and I can trace most of the important projects in my career back to that. I think one opportunity led to another. I wasn't necessarily good at self-marketing or self-promotion, although I had an amazing agent who it's not like I found her, she kind of found me, and she took an interest in me and introduced me to a lot of really important, influential people who, some of whom were quite pivotal. The work that I did with them, it was quite pivotal in terms of my trajectory. So I was very lucky about that, that kind of thing.
How soon after grad school did you have that agent?
Maybe 2 or 3 years out of grad school. And I met the agent working as a lighting designer on a play that was written by a playwright that she was representing. I just happened to be in the room.
That's awesome. And could you say the name of that IFA? Just because I feel like I should know that.
Imero Fiorentino. And the name of the company was Imero Fiorentino Associates. It's funny that I was a really good hand draftsman. I mean, it's a bit of an anecdote, but maybe people, lighting designers, might like hearing this one. So I was a hand draftsman and was quite good at it, which is why I got hired for this place. And at that time, which was 1987, there was a gradual transition into minicad and computer drafting. And the other guy who was doing a lot of freelancing in facilities design with me was Frank Brault. And I guess his drafting wasn't quite as good as mine. So our boss basically said to Frank, you learn how to use minicad, and Don, you keep drafting by hand. And so Frank developed quite a skill set with minicad, and then developed quite a working relationship with the company Nemetschek, and ultimately went to work for Nemetschek and is responsible for designing and creating the Vectorworks Spotlight platform. So I knew him when he was just like a freelance draftsman, and then he was like Mr. Nemetschek.
That's awesome. The way you should tell the story is you should say, well, I walked by his drafting every day and just looked at it and shook my head. And that drove him to.
Well, if I'm worried because Frank, that's not actually true, but
of course not.
For whatever reason, he got shifted to CAD drafting, and I didn't.
Just kidding.
I don't know who was lucky and who wasn't, but
I know. Hand drafting sounds horrible to me. So yeah.
Oh, I really enjoyed it because I was good at. I guess you enjoy the things you're good at.
That's true. All right. So your latest job, and you probably have more than one, so you can just pick a random one. But how did you get your latest job?
Well, the latest job, the one I'm doing at the moment, is McNeil at Lincoln Center Theater, and I've worked with the director Bart Shear since 2007, so that's 17 years. So we have a long collaborative relationship. He's an amazing director, and I'm very fortunate to be working with him again. And the job right before that was in China, a piece called The Great Qin in Xian, a massive kind of government and private sponsored spectacle in Xian. And that was a result of my relationship with the set designer, George Tsypin. You mentioned Spider-Man Turn Up the Dark. That was one of the shows I worked with him on, but there have been many others. And so in every case, I think it's 90% of the time I get recommended, or I know somebody involved. Sometimes it's just a cold call. Somebody calls somebody and they recommend me. You never know. The important thing, I think, is to be a good person in the room and to, nurture your skills and your reputation. I mean, I don't know how you nurture your reputation, and just be a good collaborator and a good person and do the best work you can. But I mean, I think if you do all those things.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. And this is a side note, but there's a video about being an associate lighting designer done by the American Theater Wing. And in it, there's video footage, like B-roll of Spider-Man, and you're at the tech table and you're like holding your telephone and you like put it down and you're telling a joke or somebody's laughing or something. But anyway, you're saying be a good person in the room. And I'm thinking of that video of you like smiling in the room, because usually the video is like stressed out people looking at the stage.
Well, we were pretty stressed out, but maybe that was a moment of calm.
Must have been. It was framed for the video. Okay, cool. Which job of yours has been the most well compensated?
Well, considering I've been involved with the Lion King for over 25 years, obviously that has been, and the United Scenic Artists, our union, does require a certain, at least the addition, a weekly AWC. So given that the show's been running for so long, of course, that's been, that's no secret that that's been a really good thing for me.
Amazing. Yeah, we had Carolyn Wong on the show. She was just talking about doing all the versions that aren't on Broadway too. So it's just a lot. But I assume that you also get paid for those ones, or is it the people that go out to do it? How does that work?
Well, if it's a new production, then there's, my contract stipulates that there's an additional fee. If it's a transfer, or I mean, if it's a national tour, whatever it is. So yes, every time there's a new production, there's a new fee involved, and that assumes my participation. I'm pretty good about and pretty diligent about going to every new production. And even though I've been working on the show since 1996, I'm still there. I'm still in the trenches, working on it actively. I mean, not as actively as 25 years ago, but Carolyn does a great job, and Carolyn I've known for many years. But yes, I do get a fee. That's part of the contract with every new production, and there have been many new productions. We're doing another one this fall in Toronto. We're also kind of involved in, I'm sure Carolyn talked about this, we're in this ongoing effort in upgrading all these shows, transitioning from tungsten sources to LED sources, and that's a big endeavor that's taking several years to accomplish. And when I participate in those calls and work weeks and whatever it is, if I'm in the theater, then I do receive additional compensation for that. Usually it's like the day rate that's listed for, I think it's post-opening services in the USA collective bargaining agreement. It's in that range. That's what I get paid.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, I don't know why. I didn't realize you went to so many of the new productions. I don't know why. I just thought Carolyn took care of it or something like that.
It's not that I don't trust Carolyn, but there's a certain level of institutional knowledge, and the specificity of the color palette and the stage pictures and the compositions. I'm the one person who was sitting next to Julie Taymor, getting all her notes and having those conversations from the very beginning. And the visual storytelling in The Lion King is probably more specific and more important than some shows. That's kind of at the core, I think, of its success. And I just feel committed to maintaining the integrity of the design. And I think if you divorce yourself from it, it has a tendency to slip away. And I think I feel proud about the fact, and it's a lot of it is to the credit of Carolyn and the rest of the people who are working on the show. But I think there's a reason for the show's longevity. I mean, some of it I think could be credited to the way it looks and how careful we are about preserving and maintaining that visual landscape that was so carefully conceived from the beginning. I mean, there's a lot of other reasons, but that's part of it. So it's important to me.
Because from a distance, I always see it, like I see the marketing, and I always see it as just like a corporate Disney machine. Here you are talking about like the human connection and visual, the eye for it, the artistic eye for it all, which is amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, I think one of the reasons it's run as long as it has is because it has the support of the Disney, marketing behemoth behind it. But I think that you can also argue that I don't care how successful the marketing is, if the show at its core doesn't speak to an audience, none of that's going to ultimately matter, right? And the fact is, it's not only running in New York for 25 years, but also Tokyo and London now, almost in another month, and in Hamburg very soon afterward. It has a universal appeal. I mean, it's a story about fathers and sons and mothers and daughters and the circle of life. It's like it's almost it's about the ritual of being a human, even though it's lions and hyenas and other animals on stage. There's something really elemental about the story that appeals to generation after generation. So, I mean, of course, I'm biased because I've worked on the show, but yes, it is a big corporate property that's made a lot of money, but I feel like it's got a lot of integrity as a piece.
Yeah. So back to you as a lighting designer, do you have an entity, a corporation, an LLC, or anything like that?
I do have a C Corp. I started the corporation back in, I think, 1993 because I got hired to do an architectural project. It was the lighting for the Sony building at the time. Sony bought the AT&T building on 54th and Madison, and I got involved in that project, and that was through theater connections, believe it or not. In order to get hired, Sony required a massive amount of liability insurance, which I couldn't get as an individual. So I was advised to form a corporation to satisfy Sony's legal requirements, and it wound up being a really good decision. And it's benefited me throughout my career, being incorporated as opposed to being an individual. I think that there are some benefits there.
Mostly that you can take on different projects or bigger projects.
There's things like you can, for setting up a retirement plan, you can use what's called a defined benefit account, where you're basically devoting a percentage of the corporate income toward your quote employees, of whom there are me. I'm the one employee of the corporation, and the amount of non-taxable income or income that you can deduct from your taxable income is much more significant than with a traditional IRA or other retirement instruments. I found that out through my financial advisors and accountant. That's one thing, but it also protects you from liability. And I've also used my corporation a lot to hire. It's a lot easier sometimes to get assistance paid, for example, union benefits on projects that they're working with me overseas. If I have someone working in London and they want to, and outside of the United Scenic Arts jurisdiction, and they want to get USA pension and welfare, I can negotiate a base fee from the producer and then ultimately pay that person through my corporation using a project-only agreement with United Scenic Artists. So United Scenic Artists gets my associate or assistant has contributions to their health and benefit plan, and everybody benefits. I don't know how you would do that as an individual. I think you have to get somebody to take on that role, and I'm able to do that because I am incorporated.
Got it. That's awesome. Yeah, that's amazing. W-2 versus 1099 income, what percentage of each are you getting usually?
Most of my income is 1099. I do have my job teaching at Rutgers, and that's W-2 income, but all my freelance projects, from The Lion King to the movies I've worked on to the film projects to everything, is 1099. So that's maybe 80-20, I would say, in terms of percentage. Okay.
And then you had mentioned you didn't pay quarterly before. Currently, do you pay taxes quarterly?
Well, now I pay it every month. I pay taxes every month. I mean, I'm paid. My corporation is used as the way. I mean, I'm basically an employee of my corporation, so deductions are made, taxes are paid like you would pay for any employee. So there's a kind of a anticipated level of income in a given calendar year, and that's what I get paid every month, based on my past earnings, and that's the calculation that I use to understand what to pay for taxes and et cetera in a given year. So I'm just basically an employee of my corporation. That's all.
Okay. So like at Rutgers you get paid to Don Holder. For like Lion King and your design fees, did those go to your C Corp?
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
Well, the Rutgers does, they deduct, and the way the corporation works is that if the corporation has any profit at the end of the year, that's considered taxable income, which I am liable to pay as an individual. But if it operates at a loss, or if it operates with no profit, then there's no additional taxes, although the laws have changed, so I could be inaccurate about that.
That checks out to me.
That's the way it used to be. But I'm really good. Because I have a great accountant. We are very careful about complying 100%, and I just feel like that's really important, to be in total compliance and to do the right thing as a citizen, and but also it's just it allows you to sleep well at night. You don't worry about things like that. So
Right, exactly. Okay, so that answered my next question, which is, do you file your own taxes? Do you have an accountant? How long have you had them?
Way over 20 years. Maybe I could have, as I said, I'm not a really good financial animal. So I think that if I filed my own income tax returns, I'm sure there'd be mistakes and there'd probably be liabilities. But early on, my mother and father referred their accountant, and we used them. And then we found our own person who's been managing our stuff for years, and that's been a good thing. And for freelancers, when you're working with across territories in different countries and states and entities, the tax filing is so complicated now that I just feel like you need a professional to navigate it, and the laws are continually changing.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And we did a poll a couple years ago just to see how much people were paying for taxes, and it actually was almost like 50% of the people that responded file their own taxes. And that was like eye-opening to me. I was like, I can't believe this many people in the arts are doing it. And then last week I talked with Heather Gilbert, who's a Chicago-based designer, but recently did Parade on Broadway. And she uses TurboTax and files her own taxes. I could not believe it.
Well, I think that's admirable. But also, I guess it just depends on how you set up your business, so to speak,
Yeah, yeah. I imagine that if you have a C Corp or something like that, I wouldn't know how to do it myself.
Yeah, look, I'm sure some people can do it, but it takes a lot of, a lot of skill and a lot of time. And if you have the time to do it, then great. It's not, it's an additional expense. It's not like you don't pay anything to have an accountant file all the returns. But if you work in the theater, and you work in regional theater and you're getting a taxable income from the state of California and the state of Connecticut and the state of Massachusetts, theoretically, you're supposed to be filing returns with all those states. It's just a lot. It just gets very complicated very quickly, I think. But God bless the people who can do it on their own. I think it's fantastic. I'm just not one of those people.
All right. Do you have a retirement plan, and what does it look like?
I have a defined benefit plan through my company, and that I've been contributing to for quite some time. And then also the United Scenic Artists, as you know, offers a pension plan. So that's also in the works. Will be available to me. And yeah.
Awesome. And this is just a random question because I had a kid a couple years ago and I got life insurance. Your kids are growing now. Did you get life insurance when they were younger?
Yeah. Still have it because it's universal life. So it's, you pay it for a certain amount of time and then it's in place.
Okay. All right. Outside of retirement, do you invest in anything like stocks, real estate?
Well, I don't directly. Like I said, I have a financial advisor, and this financial advisor I met was originally an artistic director who moved away from running a theater to managing people's finances, and so he has he's always had a really good understanding of what I do and my priorities as a financial advisor with a large company. They create a portfolio that's fairly diverse and that includes lots of different investments, but I don't do it myself. Again, much like filing taxes, I just feel like that kind of work is best left to people who really understand it and who live with it on a daily basis. It's been the right way to go.
Yep. Do you give to charity or give back to the universe in any way?
Yeah, of course. Absolutely. That's part of being, sharing the wealth, so to speak, and it's very important. Not just to arts institutions, but to Doctors Without Borders and many other charities across a spectrum, causes we believe in. So.
You've worked with a lot of assistants and associates, and you mentioned you can sometimes help negotiate sort of like how they get paid. Do you ever help them in their pay negotiations?
Yeah, Now, in the way contracts are negotiated for commercial projects, you have to commit to a certain number of assistant weeks upfront as part of your contract. So it's important for me to. I always consult with my associates about the number of weeks and also what kind of fee expectations they have, and I try to intervene and define those things up front. It varies depending on the person. Some associates like to negotiate themselves with the general manager in terms of their weekly fee. I mean, I usually ask, and if they want to go to bat and advocate for themselves, then I'm happy to let them do that. But I at minimum, I try to nail down the number of weeks that they can expect to be employed, and then it's up to them whether they want me to try to set the terms or they set the terms. And each associate is different, but I do as much as I feel like my associates want to be supported. That's that's where I'll go. And if they don't want any help, then that's okay too. It's really up to them. I mean, I think what it is I'm too nice a guy sometimes in negotiations. I think maybe they're better off. They might get better compensation if they negotiate themselves versus have me do it. But I try my best anyway.
Yeah, I have that. I've assisted some people, and some of them want, like, they're similar. They'll either help or not. Actually, they tend not to help. But there have been some that were trying to help and negotiate for me, and I had to say, "Oh, let me handle this," because, like, what they were paying in rent versus what I was paying in rent was just different, and I was like, I need it to be more.
Yeah, exactly.
And also, so I assisted on 2 Broadway shows, and there's something called a kit fee. Do you know about this?
Yes.
I later found out that I could have negotiated for a kit fee or something. Do your assistants and associates usually negotiate a kit fee?
I know that some do, and I didn't know. I mean, I knew about it in the film industry. It's more that's more prevalent than it is on Broadway. I think it's the new thing that maybe got brought over from the film industry. But some of my assistants expect that, ask for it, and usually they get it. I mean, it makes sense. That's usually a separate negotiation between the assistant or associate and the GM. I mean, it hasn't been something that's been defined in the contract, at least as of yet, but maybe it should be. It's a good point.
Yeah, I imagine that it will get into the contract because it's becoming more and more of a thing people talk about. But I'm just saying it out loud here on the show so that people listening can realize that is a thing that you can inquire about, because I didn't even ask for it.
Yeah, like in the film industry, it's usually like it's $50 or $75 a day, I think. I mean, I don't know if Broadway producers will pay that, but I mean, in the film industry, I think it's it's part of the collective bargaining agreement. They have to.
But the way I figured it out for myself, because I just negotiated a contract and I was putting it in, and it's not a lot. Like, I did $25 a day, but what I did was I figured, okay, I pay $5,000 for my computer and the software and everything all the year, so I just divided that by 52 weeks times 5. I don't know why I did that, but that many days, and it came out to only like $20 a day. Getting it to 75 would be great, but it doesn't have to be a lot to sort of help you pay for all those overhead costs.
I don't know what the negotiated rate would be for a theater project, but I think it's justifiable. But in the film industry, there's actually a form when you do your start paperwork for a television project or a film project. There, in the start paperwork package, is a box kit rental list, and you list basically everything that you're bringing to the job on every day, and the value of that equipment, and then what the level of compensation would be. That's a negotiated amount, but it's so clearly, if it's part of the paperwork package that you fill out like a 1090 or like a W-9, then it is something that's fixed in place and part of the hiring plan. That's not the case on Broadway, at least not yet.
Well, and if anybody's listening that has charged a kit fee for Broadway, because I think it's often in theater it's a flat fee versus like a day rate, but maybe you get that flat fee by saying how many days you're going to be there and multiplying. however you do it. But if anybody listening knows, shoot me an email or get a hold of me just because I'm curious.
I think it's a weekly tip fee, not a daily, as I recall.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So regarding finances, what advice would you give someone who's starting their career now?
I think the best piece of advice that I got was, I remember going to a union financial planning workshop early in my career, and I remember the advisor, whoever was running the seminar, said was, pay yourself first. I think that's really true. In other words, always set aside something with every bit that you earn that you can sort of contribute to something that is ultimately growing and yielding more and more income over time. I mean, just start saving early. And pay yourself first before you pay the rent, if you can do it. But I mean, there's always got to be a little bit that you can set aside, and every little bit helps. And it's amazing how quickly any amount of money can grow over time, especially with interest rates the way they are right now. That's definitely my advice. We don't, I don't think there is any formal training. I mean, we get trained about a lot of things, but when it comes to managing your finances and kind of setting up your business or your practice, which is ultimately a small business, that kind of instruction is not out there. I mean, I guess it's out there, but it's not as prevalent, right? Most people don't think about that.
The other thing is that a lot of it's out there, but for non-freelancers or non-theater people. And so what I'm trying to do is talk to enough people that we sort of, if you go Google something, maybe you can find it here and say, oh, okay, that's a theater person talking about it. Therefore, let me listen to that because it might relate more than like the Forbes article that's aimed at high earners or people with 9-to-5 jobs.
Right. That's good.
Okay, Don, last question. Where can people connect with you if you want them to, and who do you want to connect with you?
Well, anybody wants to reach out, I'm always, I'm happy to answer questions or help out if it's possible, if there's anything they want to follow up on. My email address, you can just list it, you know what it is, and just put it out there. It's fine.
All right, Don, this was amazing. Thank you so much for giving me more than an hour of your time. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, sure. Great to talk to you.
That's it for this week's episode. Don mentioned that I could share his email address. Now, I'm not going to do that just because the robot's on the internet, but feel free to reach out to me if you want to get a hold of him. Now, my takeaways from the discussion are, first, Don has had a very long career. He mentioned working for Imero Fiorentino, who is one of the pioneers of the American entertainment industry and was a lighting designer in the 1950s and 60s, and then later on as a consultant of a number of huge projects. He mentioned Bill Klages, who worked at the same time, and both of them started their careers when TV was still broadcast in black and white. And while that sounds like a long time ago in the 50s and 60s, it really wasn't that long ago. Bill passed away a month before I interviewed Don, and it just reminds me of how small our industry is and how relatively young of an industry it is. Don also mentioned that Jennifer Tipton was his teacher at Yale, another household name in the lighting industry. And I love that because she only recently stepped down from teaching there. And Don is going to continue that lineage of strong lighting design professors at Yale. Don was a technical director. And did you also catch that he was a forestry major in college? Now, he also said he played tuba and bass, and that doesn't surprise me as much because a lot of lighting designers come from musical backgrounds. Though now that I'm thinking about it, his volunteering for the fire department, I feel like makes a little bit of sense when you connect it to forestry. I'm not quite sure why or how. Nonetheless, I never would have guessed forestry. Working as an electrician, as you become a designer, it helps you understand what you're doing. So I like Don's advice of find a way to become an electrician and engage with that activity. And that ties back to our conversation with Kat Borderud, who was saying, hey, work in a shop where you're building the concerts and the sets and the rigs that are going to go out on tour. Work in the shop, learn it all there, and then you have a really good in to going out on tour if that's something you want to do. And I love Don's attitude because even now, where he is in his career, he still wants to see the gear and understand how it works. His advice to getting to work on Broadway as a designer is spot on. First off, he says, work. That's important. Be working. And then be a good collaborator and a good communicator. Work with good people who are doing good work and be the best designer you can be. But note that he said there is no clear path. You just have to work with a good team. You can put yourself in the right place, but there is no corporate ladder. You have to work on a good team that has a project that goes to Broadway. Don mentioned that when his kids were born, he started saving for college even before a 529 plan existed, and he was vigilant about contributing. So I have noted that we have started Theo's college fund, and we just need to make sure we keep contributing. Don works through a C Corp, which he started in 1993 to do an architectural project. Now, the purpose was for liability insurance, but it has also helped him shore up retirement accounts and write things off as deductions. And he said that it's helped him with assistants and associates getting onto union contracts for work that was outside of the USA. Don loved seeing Richard III in Germany and mentioned that he loves things like that because they remind us of how universal storytelling is, but we can see things through a different lens. And that certainly rings true for me too, because I love seeing through a different cultural lens. Theater is theater, but who's telling that story makes it a different experience. And related to that, this is a bit of a tangent, but just this week, I discovered a song called Dopamine by a French singer named Madelline with 2 L's. Now, there's a French version of this song and an English version, but at some point, she made a version that you can only listen to with headphones. And in one ear, the song is in English, and in the other ear, it's in French. Now, I don't know French other than a couple words here or there, but the song is so cool to listen to. And I don't know if it's the language complementing one another, but this just ties into that cross-culture thing. But if the song was just in English, you would never be able to do it. So anyway, I think it's an amazing song to listen to. I have probably listened to it over 50 times. So anyway, it has nothing to do with anything, but if you have a couple minutes after this episode, find the show notes and listen to the song, but only do it if you have headphones in. And let me know if you like it or if I'm just some crazy person that likes this. Anyway, but this also reminds me that we have several episodes of our podcast in different languages. We have Portuguese, Spanish, Tagalog, Russian. And these episodes are important to me because we're acknowledging that freelance and artistic lives are global. And like Don was saying, overall, the way we all manage our finances is a universal thing. We all have to do it. But the cultural lens makes it very different. So if you speak a different language and you want to hear one of these episodes in that language, let me know because I will find somebody and we will make an episode in that language. And one more thing about that was when Don mentioned charities, he said Doctors Without Borders, which I'm just picking up on a theme of Don's in that he is an international kind of person. Okay, and my final takeaway was he mentioned his financial advisor was formerly an artistic director. Now, we've had a couple financial advisors on this show that were either performers or musicians before switching into the financial industry. And it certainly makes sense to have someone like that as a financial advisor or planner because they understand freelancing and the creative industries. And speaking of that, we have a new Patreon patron named Sylie Scowcroft. So first off, thank you, Sylie, for joining up. I truly appreciate the support. But secondly, I'm mentioning Sylie because she recently started a financial planning group called the Financial Grove. Now, this is not a recommendation at all, and Sylie doesn't actually even know that I'm mentioning it. But we have been having an ongoing discussion for the last year or so, talking about union benefits and how designers manage finances. So I'm just mentioning if you're looking to talk to somebody about finances or find a financial planner, you could check out the Financial Grove, specifically because it is for creative people. But speaking of Patreon, patrons get an ad-free podcast feed and access to early episodes. Now, a bit of a note on Patreon, because if you've been listening for a long time, you've known that I have gone through attempts at sort of putting bonus episodes behind the paywall. But I have to admit, it never really rings true for me. because I want these conversations to be accessible to as many people as possible. So like today, talking about kit fees, that is something that I think everybody needs to know about. So I am going to put some bonus material behind the Patreon wall. Like next week, I'm talking with Travis McHale, and we talked for 3 hours. And I just don't think that the main feed wants 3 hours of one of these conversations. But I'll put that full episode behind the paywall. But for the most part, I'm making all the interviews public. So if you're listening and you're thinking about becoming a patron, know that you can head over, and there are different tiers, but know that they reflect less on bonus materials and more just about how much you want to support. And also know that you can change them or cancel them anytime. Okay, so enough about this. If you are a patron, thank you very much. You're amazing. And if you're looking to join up, do that at patreon.com/artisticfinance. Okay, so one last thing, which is that LDI is this weekend. So if you are in Las Vegas, I would love to see you Sunday or Monday at 11 a.m. in the podcast studio. So if you can find us, it would be awesome for you to sit in as we record, because the conversations, I'm sure, are going to be awesome. So on Sunday, we'll have LA-based designers Ebony Madry, Erica D. Hayes, and Zach Burgett. And then Monday, we will have Amy Deluxe along with programmers Matt Mills, Matt Gaminsky, and Erica D. Hayes is joining us again. And also remember, if you do need a free Expo Hall pass into the conference, use promo code Artistic Finance, all caps, all one word. Okay, now the dad joke to end the episode. Why did Don Holder, a forestry major, become a lighting designer? He wanted to branch out. That's it for today. Until next time, break a leg.
Thank you for listening to Artistic Finance, where we interview successful artists, leaders, and investors to help educate and inspire the creative community. To access our show notes and resources, go to artisticfinance.com. This show is for entertainment purposes only. Before making any decision, consult a professional. This show is copyrighted by Artistic Finance. Written permission must be granted before syndication or rebroadcasting.